All right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and begin. My name is Ian Brown. I'm the Assistant Director for Outdoor Ventures here at Angelo State University in San Angelo, Texas. Joining me shortly, we have Brad Beggs from East Carolina University. And I'll kind of get started here. You should see our presentation pretty much full screen here. Just wanted to begin by, introducing myself a little bit and why I decided to give this presentation. I kind of got into Google Apps a little bit more back in early 2011. I do some work with a nonprofit association called Association of Outdoor Recreation and Education, and I started chairing a technology task force during that time frame to basically overhaul how we utilized and managed our technology within the organization. We were using POP email system. We were using an antiquated website setup. It was an access database system instead of and for the association and help the association evolve in its utilization of technology. A big part of that was finding out about Google Apps for nonprofits. And so I quickly became enthralled with Google Apps and started drinking the Google Kool-Aid and figuring out a little bit more about it. So I started learning more about Google Apps for nonprofits with this nonprofit work that I do, and quickly started folding it into my program here at Angelo State. If you want to reach out to me at any point, feel free. You can see my contact information listed right here, and everyone will have a copy of this presentation. You'll notice we're using the hashtag AORE Google. Doing a live hangout on air, it's a little bit difficult to have outside devices and media streams all into one manageable presentation. But if you have a question or if you have a comment about this presentation, feel free to tweet me at ibrown2 and use the hashtag AORE Google, and we'll get you going. It looks like Brad will be joining us here shortly, so I'm going to continue on. Brad Beggs I'll let him introduce himself, but again, he's coming from East Carolina University. I'm hoping this will be a little bit of an interactive presentation. It's a little difficult on Hangouts on Air to poll the audience and see how people are feeling, if we're going too fast or too slow. So if I am going too fast or too slow, feel free to drop a comment in the comment section if you're watching it live. Or you can always ask a question using the Q&A app if you're watching it live. There should be a Q&A app in your panel where you can just drop in a question, and we'll look at those periodically throughout the presentation and try and address your specific concern or question that you might have. All right, a little overview. Since basically, like I said, I got into this and I started folding this into my program, and what I did is I reached out to a couple of people. They said they were really interested in the topic, so I sent a survey out to the rest of the AORE, and it seemed like people were really interested in the topic. So I thought, instead of waiting till the conference, it would be great to put together a series of webinars that people could refer back to throughout the summer and get a little bit more preparation in time for this conference presentation. So this first part of the series, what I'll be doing is we'll be heavily introducing Google Apps, providing an extensive overview of what they are and the entire ecosystem. And then we'll delve right into programmatic examples. I'll be talking heavily about how we utilize Google Drive and Google Groups, our operations manual, how that's a Google Doc and how it's dynamic rather than a static manual, and talking about how we automate forms within our programs, including our participant demographics, health statements, how we use this data to provide real data, real numbers to our directors real time. And I'll say real one more time. And Brad will touch base on what he's doing, the great things he's doing at East Carolina University, how he's leveraging Google Maps not only to increase revenue within his program area, but also to introduce participants to areas that they wouldn't know normally exists. And I won't steal his thunder there, so I'll let you tell him all about that. And we'll kind of get into a question and answer discussion throughout, trying to answer your questions that you post. And we'll wrap it by, where do we start? Where's a good spot to start for any program? Coming from Institute of Higher Learning, we're big into learning outcomes. So you can see here that by the end, we'll try and help receive and provide insight as to your needs or questions relating to Google Apps. I think the way we'll do this over the series of webinars is that after each webinar, we'll start to see and coalesce all of your comments and your questions that you're posting and try and theme out some of the particular things that are going on. We'll also review the suite of Google Apps again in this particular presentation and some of their different price points. Not necessarily how much is it, but the different stratifications: Google for Work, Google for nonprofits, Google Apps for education, the free account, and so on. Okay, and again, we're going to be getting into firsthand examples of Google Apps. This is the true leveraging. It's not just, oh, here's how to use Google Docs. It's how to use Google Docs or Google Sheets or Slides to make your program become a little bit more effective in an outdoor education, recreation setting. Speaking of which, I did reach out to the Google Apps for Education community because I thought, perhaps this is a style of leveraging these applications in a manner that other teachers out there might not normally use or think to use. There's a new tool out there called Google Classroom that seems to be very exciting and very useful. This will not cover too much on that particular tool. Instead, it's on the rest of the normal applications. So just a heads up on that. And by the end, I'll give everyone access to my manual and examples of how we do things within our program. So everyone will have access to this presentation as well as to my manual by the end of this presentation. Okay, so to begin with, if you're not too familiar with Google Apps, a big picture is that these applications are used and stored in the internet. It's a way of getting work done, creating content, and sharing it. It's all on the internet, hence it's cloud-based computing. They look and feel very similar to Microsoft Office, like Word and Excel and PowerPoint, but the key difference is that the documents or files are not stored locally. So they're not stored on a shared file server that you might have at your department, or they're not stored locally on your computer, on your desktop, or in My Documents, but they're actually stored on many different servers that Google has across the world. Another major difference is that once you create content within Google Apps, instead of sharing files back and forth, like for example, if I create a Microsoft Word document, I'm not having to save it to my computer, share it via email to a colleague or to a student. They work on it, track changes, and email it back to me. I'm just sharing a link to a colleague or to a student, and we're working on it together at the same time. I'll pause there for a second and unblue box myself, and I'll let Brad Beggs go ahead and introduce himself if he's ready. Hey, Brad.
Hey, y'all. So, yeah, welcome. Thanks for joining, and letting me jump in a little bit late here. Some technical glitches with our laptop. And happy to talk today about what we've been doing here at East Carolina University with the Google Maps and some revenue generation, trip planning, and special event planning as well.
Awesome. All right, I'll go ahead back to the presentation here so people can see it full screen. Okay, so like I was saying with Google Apps, another benefit to this cloud-based computing is that you're almost guaranteed, or Google boasts about a 99.98 or 99.8% uptime. So what does that mean to you? It means that even if you're at a large institution, or you work on a base, or you work in a city with a large information technology department, it's probably not as large as Google's team of infrastructure experts. And that means that they have redundant backups. They take care of making sure that you have access. I can think of one time in maybe 3 or 4.5 years that I've been heavily using Google Apps that I did not have access immediately, and it was about an hour or two later that I was back up and running. The other benefit is, I don't necessarily have to. I can work anywhere in the world with Google Apps if I'm fully invested in it. Okay. Instead of having one application, kind of another key difference with Google Apps versus Microsoft Office. You take Outlook, for example, where Outlook has several things within it, but it doesn't do one thing extremely well. Like, it has calendar, it has email, it has contacts and tasks, but to look up an old email or to search for a bit of a conversation or context, it's really not connected immersively. You have to have a different mindset to search. You have to be in the right mindset to search for that conversation in that context. Whereas Google Apps, instead of having large teams work on all of these large applications together, they have smaller teams dedicated for specific tasks. So that's why you'll see Gmail separate from Calendar, separate from Drive and Docs and Sheets and all of these different applications. So the collective ecosystem of Google, of these applications, is actually called Google Apps. Now, it depends on your account and what you're set up for, but most people, if they have a paid account, have access to most of the Google applications. Okay, so you might have heard of different nomenclature, such as Google Apps, G Apps, Google Apps for Work, Google Apps for Education, and so on. This is just different account styles that you can have. And if you're really trying to get into it, I can help you afterwards look into what style might be right for you. Since Drive is the main file management system, we'll go ahead and get started by focusing on Google Drive and its structural differences to traditional file explorers. Think of Google Drive as your online file storage management system, just like you would with Windows Explorer. Therefore, sheets, slides, docs, forms, drawings, those are the content creation systems. It's what you use to create content, and it's that meat and potatoes section. Drive and other applications such as Google Plus or the links are the ways in which you share this content. All right. Anything to add before I move on?
No, nothing to add. They're pretty easy to use, and when A and I did this initial presentation of practice run, a lot of things that I learned, even though I'm not officially allowed to use it, I've been using a lot of the apps kind of on their own between other members of AORE and other kind of associations, and found what Ian's doing it to be particularly powerful, and really makes me hope that East Carolina can get it here.
Yeah, that's a good question that we'll dive into with, I'm lucky in the sense that Google Apps for Education is utilized here on campus. Our IT department has supported it wholeheartedly. We're in almost still of a piloting stage in the sense that they're not blasting out advertisement. I'm probably the heaviest user of Google Apps on campus, but I think we're fully supported with it, so that's great. Other programs, other areas may not be supported with it, and we'll kind of get into, well, how do you skirt around that? How do you handle those types of situations, whether it's at a university or a base, and we'll get into that here in just a little bit. But now let's kind of get back to Google Drive and thinking about it from a infrastructure standpoint. So more often than not, when you're in your outdoor program, you're not necessarily thinking about the larger picture of sharing and technology infrastructure. So I kind of want everyone to switch their mindset to start looking at the bigger picture and start putting people into groups. So start thinking about the different hierarchy or student staffing levels that you have within your program area as well as within your entire department. So for example, in our example here, we have our University Recreation Department and we have 5 divisions, okay? But on our staffing side, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we have another 5 staffing areas. So that's kind of the big picture look at our program. I would encourage you to kind of replace your bubbles with what you have. If you're on a base, and you're running an MWR program specifically to outdoor, and you're a separate entity from the rest of the MWR program, think about the different key areas that you have. If you're in Parks and Rec at a city, most of your outdoor programming is connected to the rest of Parks and Rec, the rest of the city rec programming. So consider the bigger picture, the bigger implications, and the reason for that is you need to start switching your mindset from sharing an entire folder or a shared departmental drive to sharing documentation. And you don't want to share instantaneously the content with individual users, because as you'll see down the road, that will get very complicated for removing access after the fact and making sure that you retain the documents that your staff create, but instead you want to share with groups of people. All right, so some things you might ask from the beginning is who needs to work on what, who should just comment on content, and who just needs to view documents. What content should absolutely not be visible to other areas. So what we realized is that upon further examination that our professional staff, our graduate assistants, and our support staff pretty much should be able to view and edit most of the content within the recreation department. There might be a few things that graduate assistants should absolutely not really see or support staff. It's really all shared though within our department. The next level down is our student supervisors or managers. So, for example, my student supervisors within my program area definitely should see and be able to edit most of the content within Outdoor Adventures, but they don't need to edit or view content within intramurals and camps unless they're sharing something. So anytime it's within the University Recreation Drive, people can view and access documents until it goes down to separate folders. So a professional, this level right here, can view and edit anything, right? But the student supervisors and managers of each particular program area are reduced to just their program area. And then our student staffing levels, for right now, most of my student staff can only view most of my documents. Very rarely can they edit documents. However, as our program becomes more and more collaborative, we're building to the point where they can and they should be editing our documents and creating the content. Right? They're our frontline people. They understand and they know some policies might need to be edited. Okay. The other thing is that you really want to try, and the last thing I would say about this is you really want to try and keep them group rather than thinking of individuals. So for example, let's say I'm sharing the climbing gym policies and procedures. So I say to myself, okay, hey, or the emergency action plan might be a better example. I recently had one of my student staff edit and do some research and edit our emergency action plan to be updated and more useful. So instead of sharing the document with that particular student staff person, I've actually shared it with the entire group of student staff at his same level. So I'm thinking of permissions-based sharing rather than individual access. All right. Moving on right here, so most of the people should be familiar with the traditional folder structure here on the left. If you're sharing a departmental drive, an IT person might come in and map this network drive to your computer, and you'll see here you can barely see it because it's pretty small, but it says Outdoor Adventures is nested within the UREC departmental drive. So everything OA used to be within here, and so I was actually going in and creating content within all these individual folders. The downsides, there's so many downsides to this. Number one, access is granted and revoked by the IT department, and it's an on-off switch. It's not a dimmer. It's not a controllable faucet. It's just an on-off switch. So I could tell the IT department that I wanted all of my students within my program to access the Outdoor Adventures folder, but they were not. I was not able to define, no, within the Outdoor Adventures folder, I only want them to look at the operations manual or this particular thing. It was on or off. The other thing is that it's a nesting folder system. So I'm actually having to, I have I have 6 programming areas, a climbing gym, a lake house facility, educational clinics, outdoor trips, equipment rental, team building experiences. And so each of these have unique needs and unique content and policies and documentation. So I have to now go through and browse the folders for these individual files that I need to access or work on, excuse me. So the downside to that is if I barely remember a piece of information and then I say, okay, it's climbing gym related, and now I'm going to go into policies and procedures or blank forms, I'm spending about anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds actually looking for the particular file that I need. While that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, think about it from, again, the big picture standpoint. Each day, 20 to 30 or maybe even a minute long per day, and you see that time starts to add up. So your efficiency of looking for documents, even if you use the search feature within Windows Explorer, it's still not as quick, and it's still not as contextual as Google search. The other downside is that if I want to do work, I either have to be sitting at my computer here in the office, or I need to set up a virtual private network from my personal laptop and connect in through that. And if you have an IT department that has a VPN set up and a process for getting connected to the VPN and for mapping the network drive on your computer, it makes it somewhat easier. But with Google Apps, all I have to do is log in, and I'm immediately granted access to everything I need. And that doesn't matter where I am in the world. As long as it has internet access, I'm good. And there's some offline editing options, which I won't get too much into here, but if you want to know more about it, you can definitely do a search on that. Cool. Before I move on to what Google Drive actually looks like, anything else to add on that, Brad?
I do not on that, other than to say for those that have VPN access, sometimes it's really great here at ECU, sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's very nebulous as to the connection. So a lot of times most of my colleagues don't even use our VPN because it's not reliable enough.
Yeah. We have to use VPN just to pull up our email. Now, we could go into OWA, which is like Outlook Web Access, to view our email, and there's this new Office 365, which might be a little bit more easy to access. Depends on your institution, your program, your whatever company you're working with. But again, I have to log into a VPN to even pull up my email, whereas with Gmail, I'm just immediately in it. Okay, so what does Google Drive look like? Well, we'll show you. Basically, it looks very similar here. So I've got nesting folders that I can create within my file management system. You can see over here I've got extensive file nesting folders here. So this process is great. I can visually manage my data, where everything is stored. So if you're still a visual person, it's very easy to manage your documents and your data. A closer up look, you can see that, again, thinking about Google Apps from a big picture standpoint. So what we do for onboarding any new professional staff member or graduate assistant is we share this UREC Drive folder to that professional staff, to the graduate assistant support staff member. And if they are, if they should see anything that they should see, will automatically pop up. Anything they shouldn't see doesn't pop up. So the UREC Drive is automatically, we put it into their drive, and that becomes the place that they get work done. In our case, Outdoor Adventures, I share just the Outdoor Adventures Drive folder with my program area. So for my student supervisors and for my entry-level student staff positions, everything that they need to see automatically pops up, and nothing that they don't have access to, they won't even see it. So that's the other good part. There's a lot more there than what most of my students are used to. Okay, getting back to the content creation system. So you can see it's very easy to get in here and start creating anything. So you can see that all I have to do is hit New, Google Docs, Sheets, Slides, or Forms, and it's all right there. And that will take me to the particular web application that I need to create. Now, the other thing that Google has done recently, their Google Apps team has done recently, is they've created direct sites for each particular web application. So you could go to drive.google.com to look at your file management system. You could go to sheets.google.com to look only at your spreadsheets. You could go to docs.google.com, and it has a different user interface. So it's skinnied down just for that particular web application. The way my brain works and how I prefer to work, I like to look at the large picture. So I always go to Drive to manage, or to go to Drive to look from the start. And you can see here I'm using Google Chrome, so I typically always have my personal email, a Google Plus tab open, and my work Drive tab automatically open every time I start up Google Chrome. Okay, the other great thing here is that everything is kind of identified with your Google account. So the thing that connects everything and makes it more of an immersive experience is your Google account. So in this case, I've got my work account here, links to everything. So this becomes your online identity. And you can see that it might, if it's just your email address, that probably means that you haven't signed up for a Google Plus account. I would encourage you, as well as your staff, to sign up for a Google Plus account, merely because then it connects the profile together. When we're working on when I have multiple people working on one document, I can easily see their picture and identify, oh, that's Buck working on my emergency action plan. Hey, Buck, don't forget to do this. And when you're commenting and things like that, it adds the picture, And so it almost starts to put a name and a face behind who's doing what particular thing. If they don't, it still has their name, so you still have that information of who's adding what or editing or viewing your document. But the Google Plus, the picture, just makes it's a nice touch. Okay. So how do you switch between applications easily? You're simply just going to hit the matrix just to the left of this notifications button right up here, and it drops down, and you can see, okay, these are my favorite applications, although I don't use the news one. I don't know why that's there. You can actually manage this one. So you could, just like on an iPhone where you can drag and drop things around to your liking, it's very similar here. So I can use my most common applications on this page, on this front page right here. So that's a quick way to switch between what am I looking at. I start with Drive, and then I'll switch to Google Calendar, and then I'll switch to Google Email or Gmail. And so I can easily switch back and forth. Okay. This next big piece here is, okay, well, we've created the content, but how do we make it a collaborative experience? And by the time I get to the end of this, I'll give Brad another chance here to chime in and see if I've missed anything. So the next major piece here is, okay, I've created the content, but how do I share it? It's very easy. So really what you're doing within, from my understanding, is that when you pull up an application or a document, you're not actually pulling it, you're not pulling all of the content to your computer screen, or to your actual computer. What you're doing is actually accessing the server, the Google servers, where the information is stored locally there. So what you're doing whenever you share your document, you're not actually sharing the physical document, you're sharing a link to access the server, the appropriate area. So in this case, you can just right-click on a folder and hit share, or you can do it another way here. You can hit the drop-down menu and hit share. There are many sharing features, which I'm not going to get too much into right at this second, but you can look at our presentation that I've shared here at the end, and there's a link in the presenter notes to look at a support document geared toward sharing. Okay, so when you click share, this is actually what pops up, and it's very easy. So I can easily type in email addresses or groups of people, and right here I can identify, do I want them to edit? Do I want them to be able to just view the document, or do I want them to be able to drop a comment in on the side and say, oh, that's great, but what about this? That kind of thing. So I can easily identify. So that's sharing with individual people or groups. And the other great thing is that, let's say I'm working on a document and I want my student staff to pull up something, and I don't want them to have the hassle of looking for something. I can instantly grab this link here that I've highlighted and share this link with my student supervisors. Okay. Here you can see who has access to my documents, so I can immediately see, okay, you know, Adventures account, the non-human account that we have, is the owner. I share it with the non-human UREC account, and then I'm sharing it with groups of people, and you can see that my supervisors in this case can only view this document, and my staff can only view this document. This is probably the folder that I've shared with them. I don't want them to be able to edit who can share this entire folder. I want to control who gets to see anything within the OA. So that's why I have it set up in this particular manner. So you can see I can send individual people, or again, I can send to groups of people. That's as simple as just typing in an email address at googlegroups.com. Okay, or creating a Google group, which I'll get into in a minute. The other great feature here is that I can invite I can email people. I can email people this file, but I'm not really emailing them the file. I'm emailing them a link to access this document. and then I can write a note. A prime example of that situation is I did that with this presentation that you see. So this is a Google Slides presentation, and Brad and I kind of worked on it together. He dropped in slides after the fact, and I just emailed him a quick conversation like, hey, you said you were going to add in stuff about leveraging Google Maps. Please do that at your convenience, and he was able to do that. The next two things I'll get to is just link sharing. So if you're at an organization that has a Google Apps account at your institution or on your base or in your city, then you probably have an @ domain name. So in our case, it's @angelo.edu. What matters about this is that I can now just provide access to anyone within Angelo State University. So as long as they have an @angelo.stateuniversity.edu account, then they have access to my document. I can change it to, it doesn't matter who's within ASU, as long as they have the link to view, or I can make it public to anyone on the link, anyone with the link to view. A good example of sharing with anyone with a link is two examples I can think of off the top of my head. So this presentation is shared to anyone with the link can view. I don't necessarily want to put it on Google Index. So like I don't want it to be just publicly out there. I just want it to be kind of to anyone that's watched this presentation that really wants to get into it a little bit more, or people that are really interested about this particular topic, they have access to it. Another example would be my operations manual. We're at a point with our operations manual that it's almost ready for people looking at it, and sharing, so that other outdoor programs can look at it and use the content that we've created to add to their existing system. So I've got anyone with the link on for my outdoor manual. Okay, before I move on, anything to add on that, Brad?
Not with the sharing or the usage. Typically, most people should be able to find that relatively straightforward once they take the time, as you indicate, to figure out what the permission levels should be.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is just trying to figure out, okay, who should see what, and making sure that you double check that before you share. For example, being on the board of directors for the AORE, that's not necessarily a good example. My programmatic budget, making sure that I'm not sharing my programmatic budget with the entire world to see. That's something that I should be sharing with my director, with my supervisor, and getting their thoughts and their input about. And likewise, I don't want my student staff to see it. So it doesn't hurt to spend just an extra second to make sure you're sharing it with the appropriate people.
But if you do get it wrong, or it's not quite the way you need, it's very easy to change that on the fly in the moment. So you can get it set up like, oh, that person shouldn't be, or that document, that folder should or should not be. Very easy to fix that retroactively. They're not one and done.
Yeah, great. Yeah, definitely. Good point. A good point would be even after the fact. So if you invite a student staff member to work on something and they leave your organization, you can remove their access immediately. Okay. So I kind of already referenced this a little bit, but basically, again, our professional, our support staff, and our graduate assistants, they can edit, view, and comment pretty much on anything. But my student staff can only look at things within the outdoor adventures area. So what are your areas? Let's say your outdoor program is large enough that you have people that are working only on marketing, or that are only working on trips or the climbing gym, and your outdoor program is so big that it's so massive. Maybe you need to only share it with those particular areas. Okay. So someone dropped in a question here. Does the link sharing give more permission settings than file sharing? Does the link sharing give? I'm not necessarily sure what you're asking there, but it seems like I would say that link sharing allows you to get a randomized link for a particular file or folder that you want to share that with. And you can do whatever you want with that link. You can share it out to people, or you can hold on to that link, and nobody needs access to it. I think you should probably drop another question, another follow-up question in there, so I make sure I'm hitting your particular question. I apologize there.
Yeah, or if I understand what Joe is asking, it may be that with the link share, you get a very specific document. The file sharing is a whole bunch, but the depth of can edit, can view, and can comment, I believe those are all the same, regardless of whether you're sharing the whole folder or simply sharing the individual link to an individual document.
Great. Okay, awesome. Now here's the next great part, is utilizing Google Groups to manage sharing. So I alluded to this a little bit earlier, talking about groups rather than individuals, but there's another great application called Google Groups. Now for some reason, Google Apps administrators can actually identify if they want, if they want you to use the domain name that you work for tied to the Google group or not. In my case at Angelo State, no, I cannot create a Google group that's at ASUOA at angelo.edu. Now they turn that off for a variety of reasons, but it's very easy because it's ASUOA at googlegroups.com. So I lose the Angelo State branding when I switch over to this Google Groups process, but it's still very identifiable with Outdoor Adventures at Angelo State. You can see that this has been so successful and an efficient way for me that I've actually created several groups. I actually I actually advise a fraternity here on campus, and so I've created several Google groups for the fraternity that I advise. But you can see that I have an Outdoor Adventures team, so that's anyone that works within OA. I've got my supervisor's level, and then I've got the administration level, so that's myself and my graduate assistant. So I create a Google group, and you can name the Google group, and you can choose the email address that you want to send it to. In my case, it's ASUOA at googlegroups.com. I can provide a group description. I also chose at the beginning to make this a collaborative inbox. I think the future idea is that I will share this email address publicly with people to email us questions, and instead of myself or my graduate assistant having to answer back, we can assign that task of answering or replying to a participant to one of our student staff. A good example would be an equipment rental question. Someone says, I've got a question about spring break. How do I rent stuff for spring break? And I could just assign that particular task to my equipment rental manager or one of my student supervisors in charge that day. So that's a good future use. But right now, it's a closed group for me. So I identify who I want to add in, and I manage that very closely, because what I do is I share documents with, I'm sharing documents with these groups rather than with individuals. So I found this out very quickly, that it's much easier to remove one of my student staff members from one of these groups, and then it instantaneously removes them access from all of the documents that they don't need, rather than going back to Google Drive and trying to figure out, remember, what do they have access to, what do they not have access to, and trying to remove them post haste. Vice versa, it's easier to add them and instantaneously make sure that they have access to everything rather than trying to individually add or remove from folders or files. So it's a part of my onboarding process and deboarding process to add or remove folks from these various Google Groups level whenever we're training or onboarding new staff members. It's a part of our checklist. So, and it doesn't take long. Cool. Anything to add?
Not for this section, I do not.
Okay. Awesome. Just a quick snapshot of, okay, well, how does it look like, what does it look like if you are a Google Apps administrator? I took this from our AORE admin panel snapshot. So you can see that it's very user-friendly for someone that's not as tech-savvy. Brad was asking me the other day during our run-through, how do I learn all this stuff? Well, really, it's just been getting in there and playing around and figuring things out. But the true power of anything Google is this box with the blue button at the top, the magnifying glass, the search feature. Within Drive or within whatever you're using, you can just type in bits and pieces of information that you remember, and it instantaneously brings up your documents. So, for example, if I'm in Gmail and I'm trying to remember a conversation, I can search that particular person's name. I can search for part of the conversation, and it automatically brings up what I've talked with, who I've talked with, and what we've talked about. Rather than the browsing, I'm again going back to that 30 seconds of trying to click on stuff to find the appropriate conversation and the context. Well, that power of search connects over to Google App Admin Panel, and so I can search for a user, I can search for a particular application and control that. And the other power of Google Search is if I don't know how to do something, just Google it. So it's very easy and very user-friendly. So now I'll kind of dip into best practices, and just notice that these are actually dummy accounts. These are non-existent. So if you email any of these people, you'll get a error message back. But basically, after researching and preparing for the AORE, this is what I found out: that you don't want to share documents with email addresses outside of your organization if you don't have to. The reason for this is if that employee leaves your organization, you want to make sure that you can immediately suspend their account. And when you suspend their account, that everything that they've worked on, everything that they've ever worked on is retained within your organization and your company. So that liability becomes very limited. So the other thing is that you want to make sure you have individual accounts rather than large accounts, because I want to make sure that John Doe is not sharing his login information with Mrs. Smith. Okay, it's a good practice not to be sharing login and password information amongst some employees throughout the organization. A prime example, getting back to our issue right now, we have an adventures@angelo.edu account. It's a non-human account. It's a public account, so somebody that has a question about OA can email us, but I have to share that login information with my graduate assistant so that they can get in and answer the question. Well, what happens when my graduate assistant leaves? I have to go in and change the password so that they no longer have access. And I do this because it's the best practice, not because I don't trust that employee or because I have ill feelings toward that employee. I do it because I should be doing that. I should stop sharing student ID information, or we call it CIDs, it's the student ID number, and financial information with my graduate assistant after they leave. If they don't have a reason or a purpose to access that data, they shouldn't have access. So again, permissions and sharing, it just makes it much easier to share documents when it's within an organization. And if you're sharing if you're using a branded account within Google Apps, whether it's Google Apps for Work or something like that, and you go to share a document outside of your organization, it will warn you. And if you're an administrator, you can also choose to say, hey, none of our employees can share a document outside of our organization. Fortunately, we don't have that on here at Angelo State, which is a good reason because, you know, a prime example, again, this slideshow presentation, Brad and I have collaborated on it. So us working together, it's easiest for us to share it. I would say the last thing I would say about this is you want to really make sure that during your onboarding or your orientation for your new employees, you're teaching them to, whenever they create content within Google Apps, they automatically transfer ownership over to the non-human account of whatever you have. So in our example, if they create a new emergency action plan, they transfer ownership to OA. It just makes it a little bit easier if they were to leave the organization, or rather when they leave the organization, that we retain that document and their work, rather than them leaving and we don't have access or we can't manipulate that document. Cool. I built in a question and answers break in case people have particular questions right now, because the next part of this conversation we're going to dip into the actual examples of outdoor adventures and East Carolina University. So if you have a question, feel free to remember to just drop it in the question panel, and all you have to do is just type it up and we'll try and pull it up. And we'll do that throughout the presentation. It seems to be slow enough now that we can always just pause and answer your questions. Okay, so for this next piece, go ahead and you can actually open my operations manual if you'd like to. You can scan this QR code, or you can go to this link, goo.gl/opluw2, and that will bring you up into our operations manual. Okay, so our operations manual here, you can see that this is a massive Google Doc, and it looks pretty big, but you can see, again, we've got a long list of people that have actually collaborated on this project with us. The great thing about our operations manual is that a while ago what we realized is that every time we make an edit or an update, we were reprinting our operations manual several times. And 130 pages or so, or even less at the time, that's a lot of paper. So that had a direct environmental impact. Sure, that link is, yeah, there you go, Kate. So that link, I'll just go back to it real quick, is goo.glopluw2. I'll leave it up there for just a second. So that was the issue. Okay. Man, my mouse is going a little wonky here. Sorry for the delay here. My mouse is fried. Okay, so could you provide that link? Yes. I think what I can do here is copy link, and I'll go back to the Hangouts. If you're in chat, we'll put that in chat. There you go. All right. There you go. So if you're in chat, should be right there. All right. So that's what we realized is, hey, we need to make this a dynamic piece. The other great thing is in a digital age like we are in today, you know, providing bringing in other examples, other documentation out there from the outside in uh, is is beneficial to us. So we don't necessarily have to be the content creators, or we can create we can add in supplemental information just by simply hyperlinking. So a prime example for that might be Rock Climbing 101, providing, hey, the Climbing Wall Association has a guide to climbing. Climb Smart, CWA partnered with Climb Smart, and they provided a video. So linking in this content into our operations manual and allowing it to be real-time collaboration. The other piece to this is that my student staff have access to this, so they can view this, and instead of trying to search through a binder for the appropriate form, all they have to do is simply hit Control F if they're on a Windows computer and search for the appropriate document. Let's say they need to fill out an incident report form, and you can see how quick they'll have an incident report form that they can go to, and they're instantly filling this out. And when they click submit, I automatically get an email, hey, this is what happened at this particular program area. And I'll get more into forms in just a second, but whatever they're searching for, let's say they're trying to look at, let's say, staff training, and they need to go back to some of the modules here, they can instantly get access to that. So that information is right there. It's easy to grab, and it's very collaborative. So if I wanted a student staff member to work on a section of this, a student supervisor who's a little bit more of a subject matter expert, that cross between working the front lines and being an administrator, they're starting to grasp the idea of policy, and who better to get their input on. They can actually work and build in sections. You'll see that this isn't a finished product. I think it's important to note that we're still working on citations and making sure that that language is a little bit more formalized. You can see we've pulled in several sources here, so I apologize if I haven't cited every source appropriately quite yet. You'll see some areas that just have random letters. It's just a placeholder because this is a live document, just like a full value contract or commitment. It's being edited real time, but we're also using it real time. So we're getting there, but I think we're at a good point where we can share it. Okay, so I'll kind of dip quickly into my forms so everyone can see the different uses of how we're really leveraging our different forms. The first example here that I'm really pumped up about is our participant demographics. So we started out several years ago by having a sign-in sheet at every program area, and it was just an Excel document, and a participant would write in their name, circle which year they were in our program, so freshman, sophomore, junior, that kind of thing. The other thing that they would add in was ethnicity, and they had the option to decline, as well as sex, and the other thing that we added in was, I would say, residency. Well, why do we track all of this information? It's so that we can make real-time decisions. We can see the retention of this information. So I started out with an Excel document, and then I transferred everything over to Google Apps. I migrated everything over to Google Apps. So now it's simply this sign-in form where we have an iPad in most of our program areas, where participants are now used to going in and selecting the day in the program area, and it's the culture for them to fill this out. It's a self-reporting system, so they could put in the wrong name and they could put in the wrong ethnicity or the classification, but they could have done that with a sign-in form as well, a physical sign-in form. But the great thing about this is that all of this data that they put in is now instantaneously dumped into a massive spreadsheet here. And so you can see that I can now see which users are submitting the data, so which of my student staff are logged in when a participant is filling out the form, the actual program date that they participated, the program area, if there's a name of an event, like a particular trip, like the outdoor rock climbing trip, or the overnight camping trip, or the wakeboard and float trip. I can collect all of that data right here. And I track their first name and their last name because recently our Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management wanted to start looking at retention data, and seeing, hey, does this participant, because they participate in the climbing gym during the fall and the spring semester, or each month of those semesters, are they persisting toward graduation? So we have this data, and we've been crunching the numbers and mining the data to see a little bit more about participation or retention of our customers. So this sheet in and of itself is very useful. If you're familiar with pivot tables, this is a great process for looking and trying to track a particular item that you might want to look at in real time. However, I wanted my data to be a little bit more visual and a little bit more easy to read, especially for my supervisor if I needed to generate a report for them. So what I've done is I created several tabs at the bottom, one for each month, in which we have count if statements. So if a freshman participated in the climbing gym in the month of August of 2014, it automatically counts them as a participant. Okay, so that's one participant experience right there. And I track their ethnicity, so the ethnicity of the particular program areas pops up. And the reason why it's really important here at Angelo State is we're a Hispanics Serving Institute, right? We have an HSI grant. And that means that 25% or more of our student population should be Hispanic or Latino. So does that mean that my programs should be serving that particular participant demographic? You know, I'm still working on that, to be honest. That's the question, I think, the bigger question in our field right now. We know there is a gap, a cross-ethnicity adventure gap for different, I would say, for a diverse population to participate in these types of experiences. So with this data, my point is that we can with this data, we can actually attack head-on and realize what is the underrepresented population in our program and create specific programs identified to attract those participants and make them feel comfortable and welcome in our program, but as well as in our industry. This should be for everybody. Doing stuff in the outdoors should be for everybody. And how can we do that? Well, we have to start somewhere, and I think this is a key place to start. Okay, I'll pause there for just a second, and I'll answer Nathan's question here. So I'm identifying questions that I'm answering just so it pops up in the YouTube after the fact. What do we do for a field version of this manual? To be honest, we don't have a field version of this manual because we don't need one. What we'll do on the front end is two different things. So on one end, I'll have my student trip leaders fill out forms on the front end, like a logistics form. They'll find directions to and from, all of the hospital emergency risk management side of things, student travel list, goes offline. So they'll print that out for a hard copy to carry with them wherever they go on the trip, and provide a copy for the home base for me or for my supervisors. Okay, but so that's one aspect of how we handle it. The other aspect would be, okay, what about training? And what we've done recently is we've switched to this module, to this curriculum-based training process, where we create different modules for each training printed out. So we do print paper for that particular case, or those needs, where it has the agenda, where it has all the different things that we need. But we try and limit as much as possible. The other thing is if it's an actual on-campus training event, and most of our students now have smart devices, so they have a tablet or they have a larger phablet, or they'll have even a laptop, we'll encourage them to bring those devices to training events.
Yeah, the other way you could have a field version too is just to select the sections you need, control print, and then use the print selection option from the print menu, and then you could have the subsections that you might want for your staff in the field.
Definitely. Okay, so I'll kind of quickly wrap up participant demographics with just showing you, I can quickly, instantaneously looking at trends over time. So I took a snapshot back in May. You could see that it was mid-May, so my participation numbers were not it normally are, right? But I can see which areas are the most popular within my program, and I can also see, so then that means that I can I can allocate the resources appropriately, right? The climbing gym, the lake house are the two most popular programming areas. That means that, number one, I need to make sure that we have enough staffing resources for those areas. And number two, I might need to actually market and look at the other areas that aren't doing as well. Maybe we need to identify and figure out how we can make it a more attractive program area for participation. Okay, my supervisor will often ask me for real-time data. So this makes it, all I'm doing is going in and printing this and sharing this with them. At one point, I was sharing this on a monthly basis with them, and that's another aspect. He didn't necessarily need access to that. It was too much information. So I've learned how to summarize and provide overviews. This right here would be too much data for him. I'm able to share even more to help me be successful. And then you can see I also have it pulled together for historical. Well, how has my participation done over time? Okay, so you can see over time. All right, and it looks like I'll pause here and answer Nathan's other question, or I'll let Brad answer this.
Yeah, with the access to the field version offline, if you have a cellular connection, you can use the Google Drive app if they have that. But if you're accessing a place where you're not going to have internet access, then you might be able to access that on your iPhone. So I know UNCW guys bring iPhone out. You might be able to do that. I've actually not played with that particular version. I'm not sure what the options are for a field version, digital version of the Google Drive.
It looks like there might be a little bit of stuttering on your end, Brad. I don't know if it's on my end as well. So I'll just say that yeah, you can set up to access Google Drive, and it's as simple as going into settings and turning on offline access if your app's administrator allows you to do that. But it should be easy if you just do a quick search. It's still not 100% on the plane. On a plane ride, it's easy to work on a Google document, but to rely heavily on offline access, I'm still not quite there yet. Okay, so I'll kind of keep this train rolling, jumping into health statements. And again, the need was, well, we want our participants we want to make our pre-trip meetings the most effective as possible. And what does that mean? Well, it means not filling out forms during our pre-trip meeting. It means having this knowledge ahead of time, and combining it into a more effective collaborative conversation. So if we know that our participants are particularly allergic to a certain food, or they have a particular health concern, we can discuss and address those concerns during our pre-trip meeting rather than after the fact. And we do so in a private and confidential manner, but you get the gist, right? So the thing that we run into is, okay, most people are familiar with Google Forms. It's a way of collecting information from a user, and typically this information is stored in a spreadsheet, just like I showed you on the first tab of the participant demographics. So it's up to you how you leverage that data. In our case, what we've done is we've set it up to pull all of this information and put it in a prefabricated template, and then download it as a PDF and email the PDF copy to the Adventure's email account as well as to the participants, so that they have a summary copy of their information. And then it deletes the temporary Google Doc file, and what I'll do is then upload that PDF. And I'll get to that in just a second. So, okay, the email automatically, once the user clicks submit, it automatically fills out this template and it emails the participant and our non-human account. And you can see here, like, it's all very much uniquely identified. So I can change the subject line. It's all personalized to my program participant. Okay, in this case, you're looking actually at outdoor trips registration confirmation. So in our case, whenever a participant registers, we fill out a registration form, a Google form, and then it automatically sends them, hey, thanks for registering. Here are your next steps, right? And you can see here that online health statement is linked right there, and again, personalization. So it's making a connective, immersive experience for them. What are you signed up for? What are you on the wait list for? And please fill this out. Oh, by the way, if you our ski snowboard trip, here's our winter clothing resource. Okay, and again, filling out that health information. Here's hopefully a sample pulling up. So instantaneously taking that data that they submit, and it puts it into a PDF where it's a lot more readable. The downside to a Google form is it takes that data and dumps it into an Excel-looking thing called a Google spreadsheet, and it's very hard to read some of those larger essay questions. Well, it takes it into a template that I've already created, and it lets me know, especially on some of these larger quality, read it. So what I'll do is I'll print this out and share this with the trip leaders for that particular trip. I upload it to our Outdoor Adventures drive, so only I can look at it. But if a participant is going on more than one, filling this out multiple times. And electronic agreements are still fairly new, but here, hey, if you do get hurt, can we give your information and get you treated at a form with them? Will you approve being treated? Will you also approve that any of the medical costs are on you and not on the university? So this gives us a little bit more So the next step here would be equipment rental. A couple of years ago when we first started, we were only doing offline forms, and we were doing paper forms. So I'll quickly get into this one. What we ended up doing is now we on our web page form. So participants of our programs can just go. An ASU student can just go to our web and rental program, and they can look at all the different items available for rent, and they can fill out our online resume. So, and the form I see is pulling up. So they'll fill this form out, and then I instantly get an email, hey, so-and-so filled out a form. Myself or my graduate assistant will go in and review their information, and we can see here, okay, you know, James Cummings is trying to rent something. We copy his data into our run sheet, and our script that we have, our Google Apps script that we have, automatically reads his data and prints out a online rental reservation for us. Leveraging our sheets, our Google Forms, to do more than just fill out do more than just filling out and having a static data response. It allows us to leverage it so that we are getting this data, and it's viewable. It's really usable. Another example of this would be another issue of this would be, or example of this would be student employment applications, right? Whenever a student writes in why they want to be a part of your program, that long essay question tends to fill up an Excel spreadsheet, makes it hard to read. Well, it takes that data and plugs it into a nice, easy-to-read Google document. Okay, so I'll answer Mac's question here. How do you create this template? I actually, right after this presentation, a blog post I did about this should go live, where I do a screencast on how to do this entire process of taking a form, creating a template, and then writing the code. And I have sample code in my YouTube description, and then going live from scratch from start to finish, basically. So, the blog post is, if you go to guitarcasediet.weebly.com, and I'll post a link to it in well, shoot, I'll probably do that right here in the chat. You go there, that should take you to my blog post after the conversation. Let's get back to Q&A. Okay. All right.
Before we go, I want to take a second, Ian, and answer Nathan's questions about any HIPAA concerns.
Sure, definitely. So a couple of questions here coming up from Nathan. HIPAA compliance. So I haven't reached out to my risk manager about this particular aspect. However, I think what I've identified is that so when a participant fills out their health statement, anyone can view the form and fill it out. I am the only one with access to review the results of the health statement. Okay, but when they submit the form and it creates a PDF report, I will print that report out for the trip leaders going on the trip. So I don't have any HIPAA language particularly in my form quite yet about sharing their information. It is an area where I'm still behind the ball, and maybe I need to reach out and figure out with my risk manager, how do I plug in some HIPAA language into the form that, hey, it says we will share this with your trip leader after you click submit. So we don't have that in there. However, during the pre-trip meeting, we do address that with the participants, and we say that, you know, if you haven't filled out this form, please make sure you're doing that, and make sure, you know, we keep this information confidential. We keep it locked, which we do. So we do, by very essence of our program, we do comply with HIPAA. We just don't outright talk about it. And that's the next step for us to do, for sure. Yeah, good point. Oh, there's my mouse going wonky again. Are you able to hit done on that question?
I do not have that as an option on this end.
Okay. All right, there we go. My computer thinks I'm clicking on all sorts of stuff. Okay, so then the other question is, can I share the link to our participants? Would be happy to share that with a few select individuals. Again, that has sensitive information, so on who I share that with. All right, I've talked at length and ad nauseum about outdoor adventures, so I'm going to kind of get the next piece and turn the ball over to Brad here to talk about leveraging Google Maps.
Excellent, thank you. So the Maps application is something I've been using for a while. Initially got into just so I could kind of record where things are, as I found it here in Eastern North Carolina. And we use it really in two different ways for our adventure program here. And then I've got some of our facility folks using it in a different way. So first we're going to talk about how to use it for increasing rental revenues. So using some of the applications is something called Google Fusion Tables, which is a fancy spreadsheet that has geolocated data that I've been input. You see as a screenshot here, kind of a map of all these different places that you can go and camp, hike, bike, and paddle in Eastern North Carolina. If you want to see the live version of this, you can go to adventure.ecu.edu. Scroll down just a half page of that, and you'll then see that map on there as well. And what this map has allowed me to do is highlight all the amazing areas that we have here, and then allows our renters, when they're at home, they're looking for new places to go. When they come into our shop, our staff go, oh, you're looking to go down to the Beaufort area. Well, here are some of the actual paddle trails. Here's where you can camp. Link to other information. And with this particular map that we have set up here, and with a more simplified version before, we went from about $3,500 in rental revenue to about $4,000 any given year. As far back as 2004 through about 2009, our revenue always plateaued there. With this particular map, pushing it out there, highlighting it when people come in, then they were able, our revenues increased every semester. Now we're clearing about $8,500, and we have not increased our cost of our equipment, and we've only added on one extra day, so we're open on Saturdays, which we had not been in the past. We found it really successful to promote all these different outdoor recreations. And now for our region, it's actually caught some regional attention among a lot of tourism boards to say, oh, this is what people are wanting, because they're coming to Eastern North Carolina. It's very difficult. So I'd be happy to share at another point in time how to step that through. That version of the map, Fusion Tables, is a little bit more complicated than what we are about to share here. So the other way we use maps beyond revenue generation is using maps to plan trips. So what you're seeing now is a screenshot of a recent trip, 100-mile trip on North Carolina's beautiful Pamlico River. We did this as a training trip, and my staff then used it to plot where we're going to camp, access points, boat ramps, water access points, and the actual trail in of itself. And then, Ian, if you can click on that, I believe that should take us to a live version as well, from probably on your end. And I think I may have lost Ian. 1 second here. Let me see if I can steal the screen. All right, here we go. So now you'll be able to see here on the screen that version on the map. So this is called a Google My Maps, and is pretty easy for just about anybody to work on. And once Ian gets back, we'll be able to kind of walk you through it here. But here's kind of another version of this map we use for another training trip. And you see a variety of custom icons that you can use, and you can drop in text as you want. You can also, on another version I'll show you, you can also put photos in there as well. And then you can kind of zoom in, and on the side, if you wanted to, you can hide different layers. So this is a pretty simple version. There's no layers, there are no photos, but it works fairly well. If I was to show you a slightly more put together version, this is something I've done for a local paddle trail about 30 minutes from here in the town of Little Washington. You see over here I have a layer called paddle trails. I can hide that or show it. I have points of interest that I can hide or show. And so I have 2 layers here. You can create up to 10 layers, and each layer typically is going to be information that is related to itself. And if I wanted to, if I have, oh, this is actually, here's one with a photo so people can see what it is. So this is great for your staff to get a sense of what it should actually look like and what are they actually looking for once they get here. Or if you want to, you can make this available to just about anybody, and they can also view it as well. I can change a few other options here. You can change the base map down here to different versions depending on what context I would like to work in. For me, satellite imaging tends to work the best. And the cool thing is I can also print this. So if I want to create a very custom homemade map for our participants and our renters, I can take this map, zoom in at different levels, and then you see here I hit the print button. It's going to then load almost that exact image, and then I can hit the print button and I can hand that to my trip staff for kind of a pretty generic map, kind of not for navigation, but works well enough. Or I can use it for my renters so they can generally see about where they need to head. I could zoom in and out on this as well. Works pretty well for some very rough navigation. If you're in the trails in a forest, it doesn't work so well at all. I can also, more importantly, if I want actual navigation, if you're familiar with the GPS information, I can export this whole map into a KML file type, as you see right here, and then upload that into whatever GPS software I use, Garmin's Basecamp, upload that, and then download it to my GPS. And I find it's easier to map in here than it is often in Garmin's Basecamp application. So this is a simple version. It's called Google My Maps. Let me see if you guys have any questions on here. All right, thanks, Joe. Yeah, so to actually do the map, so we'll pop back here now to the actual map here. So you're looking at a screenshot. If you go to maps.google.com, you'll see once you click on the search bar over here, it then will have a drop down say to My Maps. Caveat with this though is you do need to actually be signed in to Google and wish to use this. So if you're not signed into an account, you're not going to be able to create a My Maps map under there. Once you do, you see now here there is a option to create a map. So you'll click on that, and then that's going to actually take you to the map, and then you can start manipulating the map as you see fit for the different layers, the different icon types, and the different font information. This has been great for a lot of overnight trips and a lot of the routine areas, so staff can then zoom in on things and go, okay, this is where it's at, this is where I'm going. I found it particularly helpful. And if you can go to the next slide, Ian, please. Sweet. So we've done the kind of that live demo on here. I want to show you one other thing with this. I'll give you a quick tour. So here's your markers. You can put a marker just about anywhere you want. If you want to upload a photo, you can upload a photo either from your hard drive. If there's one from an internet web site, say from a Facebook profile of yours or from a fan page, you can do that. You can import videos as well. Super easy and straightforward. And you can put in multiple photos into any one email. Here's one of one. If I had a second photo I wanted to share, and then a little arrow would appear right here as well. And then add layers is here. And the neat thing is if I get my layers wrong, if this paddle access point needs to be up here, I can just drag it between the layers. Pretty straightforward on that. And if you want to, say this is, and you want to make a more complicated version, you can make it Google Fusion tables. It's going to require some coding. You can make this pretty complicated. You can add more data points than you probably will need. And then you can actually embed this on your site to whatever dimensions you want. And then you can go forward and it's then available to the public so they can see all the cool rad areas that you have in your neck of the woods. Cool. And if you're looking for help with Google My Maps, their help options are really nice. Very detailed, in-depth, and I've used them to make the maps a lot better than they are, and they're consistently being updated. Cool. So that is kind of a brief overview of a lot of the maps that we have on here. If you can go forward, just to see if I have anything else on that, Ian, please.
I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So those are two different maps for trip planning, maps for revenue generation. And if you guys do have questions, you can reach out after or here in a little bit, and I'm happy to walk with you individually through that as well.
Yeah, I think that's the last piece is getting to the bigger picture here, and that you know, Google Apps is a great tool. You could go in and create a Google Doc and work with a student or with your employees on that particular thing, or you can really try and leverage abilities, including Google Apps scripting. Or if you're less familiar with JavaScript, you can use something like add-ons. So there are many tools, and there's this giant community behind Google Apps, not just the company, but the users that help create all these different ideas on how you can use and tweak Google Apps to fit your needs. So this particular conversation, to pull it back to outdoor education or recreation, is why do we do these things? Well, number one, as Matt Marcus at Georgia Tech puts it, he does it so that he's spending less time in the office and more face-to-face time with the participants and his employees, because that's really what matters in our program, is connecting and providing these developmental experiences and conversations. Well, how do I get to that point? I get there by managing my program very effectively to the point where these processes are automated. I think something Brad and I talked about on his aspect, and I apologize if you covered it when I got kicked off of the wireless internet. But one of the things is that living in the digital society that we do in today's day, a lot of our program participants, what is the point of your program? Is your point to bring participants outside and to facilitate these experiences, or is it to promote outdoor education and to further our field by making more and more people aware of outdoor education and recreation? And if it's the latter, then perhaps participating doesn't necessarily mean they're physically participating on an experience with you, but they are living through maps like this, and they're exploring the world around them through the tools that you provide. In Brad's case, he's created these maps, and participants can look at all of the different things that he has available around his area, and he's got pictures. And so it's like, you know, for me, Red Bull, these extreme Red Bull, sorry, my mouse is driving me nuts, these extreme Red Bull mountain biking, downhill mountain biking videos. Am I going to go out and do base jumping and do this these extremist sports? No, but I can live vicariously through YouTube and get my adrenaline pumping and be aware and cognizant of these different sports like that. So do you have anything to add about that particular aspect?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. A lot of people want to see kind of where they're going and what it might actually be like. So we found that these maps help with that. The photos and the videos all help give a sense for a lot of students who are not familiar with the outdoors. And it lets them realize, oh, this is actually approachable, and I want to do it. Or, hey, the Red Bull stuff, that's way cool. I never want to do it, but I'm kind of happy just to hang out here and do some of the more casual ones. So it gives you the whole spectrum of students that are looking to be interested in the outdoors who may not have that background but want to know what it might actually look like before they go.
Definitely. Okay, so to wrap up the conversation, I think, you know, the important thing here you can see on the slide, and I can't click on it or otherwise it will mess it up, is that just check with your institution. You know, in Brad's case, their institution prefers you don't use Google Apps or third-party things that they haven't checked out beforehand. At Angelo State, we have bought into the process, and so they kind of let me utilize and leverage Google Apps as much as possible here. Another good example is within the AORE, you know, one of our board members works on a military base. When we first started using Google Apps for AORE, she couldn't even view a document when she was on base, on the base's network, let alone work on anything related. But over time, the base IT department, once they had time to review Google Apps and get that particular request in to have access to it, I think now she can view and edit and work on stuff on base for the AORE. I don't necessarily know if the base is utilizing Google Apps, but check with your local base, check with your IT department, and see what they're doing. And I'll let Brad talk a little bit about how he gets around his issue on his campus.
Yeah, so for us, we'll typically use Google Docs for usages where the ECU is not actually able to provide us a good or better alternative. So for example, I have a climbing competition between 5 other universities. We need to use Google spreadsheets so we can all see the scores and talk and transfer them back and forth. And I figure, to me, emailing is not appropriate. 365 by Microsoft doesn't work. Each university doesn't have that. So it's a very simple one-time thing with no information that is particular really to any one university. So that's I'm very comfortable there. And then Google Maps is also there's no alternative offered by ECU, so in my mind we can go and use that. But in terms of using all documents, much like Ian is, we do have options with Microsoft SharePoint that kind of works, and so in the meantime I'm kind of waiting, hopefully they'll catch up. So I use it when no option exists, and when an option sort of exists, even if it's not that great, I currently just stick with it here. And the IT people I've talked to seem to be very comfortable with that. They've never said don't use Google Maps like you're having, or don't use Google Spreadsheets. Just don't start putting up all of your information there currently.
Yeah, you know, so the other thing is with more and more outdoor programs, or I'm sorry, more and more organizations picking up Google Apps because of how effective it is. You know, your institution actually might have Google Apps. We had it for quite a bit of time before they actually announced it. So I kind of keenly picked up on that they were using it as soon as they switched our students over to Google Apps, or Gmail rather. I noticed that, oh, all of a sudden faculty and staff have access to this. That's great. So it's a conversation with the IT department and what are we trying to do with it. And I think the piece there is that you might want to spend a few minutes considering how you would organize your Google Apps life, and how you would organize the process and have some answers already, like about security, about locking out people that shouldn't be looking at your stuff. And so you should have those answers before you go to have that conversation with your IT department. More and more organizations are picking it up. I think Los Angeles uses it, so like huge cities are using it because it is a reliable product and it's a growing community of users. So that's pretty exciting. The next step is determine which level of Google Apps is right for you. You can sign up for a free account where you get, I think it's 15 gigs of storage space that you can use for between Gmail, Drive, and Google+. So on my personal side, my personal photos back up to my Google Plus account, and that eats into that storage. So it's very, very good for a personal, but for a work account, I would imagine, especially if you start utilizing photo, storage for any media, that's going to start to quickly eat up your storage. So start to consider about it. Consider the long-term usage. So there's Google Apps for free, and you would not get a domain name there. It would just be @gmail.com. There's a nonprofit application process for nonprofits. If you're identified as a 501c3, you can apply for the Google Apps for nonprofits, and there's an entire website on that process on how to apply. But you definitely have to have the IRS documentation or the equivalent in the country that you're in for that. And then there's Google Apps for Work, where you can get an unlimited storage account per user, and you're paying, I think, about $10 per user per month. But when you think about it, that might sound expensive, but with everything that you get for it, it's actually, I think, a great investment, not only in your employees, but it's a product that that works, and when something doesn't work the way you want it to, you can always reach out to this large community of people. And then there's Google Apps for Education, so that's another style of Google Apps. The third thing I would say is really consider, again, your infrastructure. Think about it on the front end. I have a non-human account here where it's not tied to any one individual within our program, but everything is stored on that account or transferred ownership to that account, so that if I were to walk out of the program for some reason tomorrow, no matter what, if any of my employees were to walk out, that information is retained, and somebody could walk in and pick up and run it where we left it. So that's another important aspect, I would think. Summary notes from you, Brad?
I don't, but other than to say that, overall, Google's pretty friendly, very easy to use. If you have questions, the community that is out there that Ian talked about is very, very helpful. The map that has increased our rental revenue, I've used the source code provided by another gentleman, changed a few of the things that he suggested, didn't work. He then looked at it and go, oh yeah, this is wrong, fixed it, sent it back to me. Voila, it was up and working. And overall, yeah, Google's great, and wish that we were able to use it here. And if you have questions for Ian and I now, great. And if you have questions throughout the process while you're trying to figure out how to make it work, please do reach out. And then keep in mind, Ian's been working at this for a while. Looked at what he thought, I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. And I'm like, wow, it's going to be a lot of work. But just start that ball rolling, and then after a while, you'll have a system that is as well developed as Ian's. But in the meantime, you can just start, and then you can just get going on that.
Yeah, I think that's important to note. I like I said at the beginning, I drink the Google Kool-Aid. There's no hiding that. I almost think I should work for them. That's how much I believe in this process. So I think to play devil's advocate, are there limitations to Google Apps? Certainly. I'm not saying this is going to be the golden ticket to solving every issue in your program. There are other applications out there that might work better for your needs. That being said, I think holistically, this tends to work the best for a lot of different needs. So if you do have questions or you want to reach out to us, you can definitely leave a comment. That's the great thing about this. I have a feeling a lot of people are going to watch this on the YouTube channel rather than live. So feel free to drop a comment or drop me an email. And if you're really interested, tweet some comments or thoughts. All you have to do is just tweet me at iBrown2 and use the hashtag AORE Google, and I'll be able to follow that and see, hey, this is the continued conversation. My hope is that we can kind of pick up from here and delve down into particular topics that people are really interested in, and I can answer questions that people have out there to help you get your program in your area running up off the ground. Sweet. Looks like somebody wants to know Brad's email.
I just entered that email on the group chat, so hopefully you should be able to see that. Email also is begsb, that's BEGGSB at ECU, East Carolina University.edu. If you go to adventure.ecu.edu, you can also find my information there as well. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you about some of the mapping stuff.
Awesome. It looks like my mouse is about ready to quit, and we've burned up this conversation for quite long. So thank you all very much for tuning in. And if you have any other question or if you'd like to know anything more, we look forward to the future conversations. Make sure you head over to my blog, guitarcasediet.weebly.com, for a follow-up piece to this conversation about, hey, here's how you actually automate the forms. And I've got sample code and sample forms already ready for you to look at and delve into up there. I'd like to thank Brad for joining me and helping keep this conversation alive as I've dealt with the wireless and my mouse here, and learning a whole different aspect of something I've never even tapped into quite yet. So thanks, Brad, for joining.
Yeah, thank you for putting this together. Again, if you guys have questions, let us know. Thanks for coming.
All right, thank you.